What if Tobho Mott reforged ice into one blade for Jon Snow? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The plaza before, the great sept of Baelor, is packed from wall to wall, the morning they bring Eddard Stark out to answer for his crimes. Citizens, servants, guardsmen, all pressed together under the heat of a King's Landing morning. High above them, white stone and 7 crystal towers, the sept rises over the steps where a man in a grey cloak kneels with his hands bound behind his back. Sansa Stark stands in the gallery above, watching. She is 13 years old, and she cannot look away. She does not want to watch. She cannot stop herself. Somewhere behind her, a man in dark armor stands at the back of the gallery, and Joffrey sits on a raised platform with the easy posture of a boy who has never once been asked to earn anything. Sansa's eyes go back to her father, to the sword. Ice is a 2-handed great sword, very old, and it catches the light in a way that ordinary steel does not. There is nothing else like it in the world, and Sansa has known its name since before she could read. It has hung on the wall at Winterfell for as long as she can remember. Now Sir Ilyn Payne holds it. Ned looks up. For a moment, his eyes find the gallery. Then he looks away. He speaks his confession. The crowd roars. Sansa hears the blade come down, but Ned Stark has been preparing for this for weeks. In the days after his arrest, sitting in the dark beneath the Red Keep, he has had time to think. Not about escape. There is no escape, and he knows it. He thinks about Arya, somewhere in the city, fierce and quick and lost. He thinks about Robb, already calling his banners and marching south, carrying the name Stark into a war he may not win. And he thinks about Jon, 16 years old, standing a watch at the top of the wall at the edge of the world, with no idea what is coming and no power to stop any of it. It is Jon that Ned thinks about the most. It always has been. The arrangement he has made for Jon, he made weeks before this, in the grey hour before dawn, on the Street of Steel. That street begins down near the river gate and curves up the long western slope of Visenya's Hill toward the great sept at its crown. The higher you go, the better the shops. At the very top sits a building larger than all the others, made of timber and plaster, its upper stories leaning out over the road. 2 stone knights in red armor stand on either side of the double doors. One is shaped like a griffin, one like a unicorn. The doors themselves are carved from ebony and weirwood with a hunting scene, and they are the finest doors Ned has ever seen on a craftsman's house. He has been here before. He came once with a guard at his side, asking about a boy with a face like a young Robert Baratheon, and he found him, and he left without saying what he knew. The armorer watched him go that day, with the careful eyes of a man who has learned not to press powerful visitors for explanations. This time, Ned comes with a different purpose. Tobho Mott receives him without ceremony. He is a craftsman, not a lord. He does not bow, he listens. Ned tells him what he needs. He expects to die. When he dies, Tywin Lannister will take ice. Tywin will not throw it in a ditch. He is too cold and calculating for that. He will melt it down and remake it into something Lannister, some trophy that erases the name Stark from its steel and its memory. Ned cannot stop that from happening once it is done, but he can act before it happens. He slides a sealed letter and a heavy purse across the workbench. Tobho looks at both without picking either one up. The letter explains the rest, Ned says. The gold is for the work, and for your silence. Tobho lifts the purse and weighs it in one hand. He has done something like this before. A man paid him twice the going rate to take on an apprentice he was never supposed to question. He knows what it means when a man with power pays more than he has to. It means the thing being asked is serious, and it must stay quiet. "One blade," Tobho says, "to the wall." "To Castle Black," Ned says, "for Jon Snow." The purse stays on Tobho's side of the workbench. Ned leaves, and neither of them says anything else. Meanwhile, in the Tower of the Hand, Tywin Lannister receives ice the morning after the execution and holds it up in the narrow window light. Good Valyrian steel stays sharp without being tended. He knows that. He runs a thumb along the edge anyway, still sharp enough to shave with. He has already decided what to do with it before the crowd in the plaza below has gone home. 2 swords, one for Joffrey, who has wanted a blade of his own since he was old enough to understand that kings carry them, one for Jaime, who is Lord Commander of the King's Guard and should carry something worthy of it. Let the sword of House Stark become something Lannister. Let it stop meaning the North and start meaning what happens to those who defy the crown. He has his steward send word to the armourer at the top of the Street of Steel. Deliver the sword. Begin the work immediately. 3 days later, ice arrives at the shop of Tobho Mott. He carries it himself through the house and back into the stone barn in the narrow yard behind, where 4 forges burn in each corner, and he sets it on his longest table. Then he takes out Tywin's written instructions in one hand and Ned Stark's sealed letter in the other, and reads both of them in the orange glow of the fires, one after the other, taking his time. For a long moment he stands there without moving. Then he folds Tywin's instructions and sets them aside. He opens Ned's letter and reads it a second time. He sets it down on top of the folded instructions. He looks at the sword on the table. Tobho Mott has built his reputation on doing the finest work in the city. He has never built it on breaking a dying man's last trust. He goes to the barn door and bolts it from the inside. He stokes the corner forges up to working heat and picks up his longest tongs. He will work through the night alone, and by the time the sun comes up over the hills of King's Landing, there will be 1 blade on this table, not 2, 1, and before the morning is out, it will be on its way north. The morning after he first sets ice to the forge, Tobho Mott walks out of the stone barn and locks the door behind him. His hands are dark with soot. He has been working since midnight and his back aches from it. And the steel is not finished. It will not be finished for several more nights. That is the truth of Valyrian metal. It is not common iron that a man can coax into shape in an evening. It is older than the 7 kingdoms. It has a will. He has done this work before, once, for a lord whose name he was paid not to remember. The spells are spoken aloud in the old words from Qohor, and they must be spoken correctly at every stage, and they change how the metal moves under the hammer. Even then, the steel resists. It gives itself up slowly, a little more each night, like a proud thing learning to trust a stranger's hands. He has already decided what he will make. He made that decision the moment he set Tywin's written instructions in the far corner of his workbench and opened Ned Stark's sealed letter instead. 1 blade, not 2, a bastard sword, hand and a half, suited to a young man on the wall. There is enough steel in ice to make it, and enough for nothing else if he shapes it correctly. He will not cut the steel in half. He will not divide the weight and the character of it between 2 lesser blades for 2 lesser purposes. Tywin Lannister does not know any of this yet. Tobho composes the message himself, sitting at the narrow table in his house above the shop. He writes that the work presents complications he didn't anticipate. Valyrian steel requires spell work that cannot be hurried without risk to the material. The metal is responsive to forces that common steel does not feel. He would be remiss to proceed at speed and ruin a piece of such value. He will send word when the commission is ready for inspection. In the meantime, he respectfully asks for my lord's patience. He sends it with his assistant and waits. Tywin's reply comes by evening. It is brief. It says nothing about patience. It says a great deal about expectations. Tobho reads it once and folds it. He sets it on top of the first letter, in the corner of the workbench, where Tywin's original instructions have been sitting. He is the only man in King's Landing who can do what is being asked of him. Every lord in this city who has ever wanted a blade worth singing about knows that. Even Tywin Lannister, in his cold, careful way, knows that. You do not burn the only bridge that leads to what you want, not when the thing you want is already in the craftsman's hands. The threats can sit in the corner with the rest of the paper. He has time. He will use it. Meanwhile, across the city, in the high upper chambers of the Red Keep, Sansa Stark hears what has become of ice. She hears it from the girl who brings her morning water. The girl heard it from a guardsman's wife, who heard it from someone in the kitchens. The Stark sword was taken to an armorer's shop on the Street of Steel. The great lord intends to have it remade into something new. The blade her father carried, the blade that has hung above the hearth at Winterfell for as long as anyone alive can remember, is in a forge somewhere on the far side of the city, being undone. Sansa sits very still when the girl tells her this. She has been practicing stillness. It costs her something, but she has learned that stillness is safer than showing what she feels. She does not cry until the girl leaves. She is 13 years old, and she has lost her father and her father's sword in the same week. She does not know where Arya is. She does not know if Robb's army is still marching. She does not know what Bran and Rickon have been told or who told them. She knows nothing useful, which is the worst part of all of it. She sits at the window and watches the towers of King's Landing against the pale morning sky, and thinks about ice in a stranger's forge, being heated until it no longer knows its own name, being shaped into something a Lannister will carry, and a Lannister will call his own. She does not know what it will become. She does not know whose hands it will end up in. She would not believe the answer, even if someone told her. 5 days after Ice arrives at his shop, Tobho Mott is in the narrow yard behind his house when a visitor comes through the side gate. The man is stout, with a brown beard and a hood drawn forward to keep his face in shadow. Tobho knows the shape of him. He has seen this man before. The last time this man came through this gate, he brought a purse and a boy and a request. The boy's name was Gendry. He had wide, dark eyes and hands already marked from working iron, and the man in the hood said the boy needed a trade and a place to learn, away from certain eyes in certain quarters of the city. The man paid twice the going rate. He asked for silence. Tobho gave him both and did not press for explanations. This time the man comes without a boy. Lord Stark's commission, the hooded man says, without preamble. I know about it. Tobho says nothing. He waits. When the blade is finished, the man says, it needs to travel north. An armorer cannot arrange that quietly. I can. Tobho looks at him. And when it arrives at its destination, he says, Castle Black, the hooded man says. Jon Snow. My lord named him in the letter. Tobho studies the man's shadow of a face for a moment. The delivery has been the one piece of this he could not arrange on his own. A sword leaving the Street of Steel bound for the Night's Watch is not an ordinary shipment. It requires the kind of connections that a craftsman doesn't have, and that this man, apparently, has in abundance. When the work is finished, Tobho says, I will get word to you. The hooded man nods. He goes back through the gate without waiting for anything more. Tobho stands in the yard and listens to the city noise above the rooftops for a moment. Then he turns and goes back into the barn. He bolts the door. He has several more nights of work in front of him. He does not need company for any of it, and he does not want any. He crosses to the workbench, picks up his tongs, and turns back to the corner forge where the steel is waiting. The night Tobho Mott finishes the blade, there is no wind at all in King's Landing. He has been at this work across several nights, and each one has taught him something new about what this particular piece of steel wants from him. Valyrian metal is not passive. It has a character of its own, and in his experience, it does not behave the same way twice, not even when the same spells are spoken by the same mouth under the same conditions. It has to be persuaded, not compelled. Compelling it is not something a craftsman can do. He learned that the first time he attempted this work, for a lord whose name he was paid to forget, and he has not forgotten the lesson. He lights all 4 corner forges at sundown and works the bellows himself until the heat in the barn is enough to blur the air over the nearest table. Then he takes the blade with his longest tongs and speaks the first of the Qohoric words as he brings it to the fire. The words are not spoken for comfort, the way a man might sing while he works. They are part of the process, as essential as the angle of the hammer or the reading of heat by color. They are old, these words, older than the 7 kingdoms, older than King's Landing, spoken in the forges of Qohor, when the Targaryens still had their dragons, and the world was a different place entirely. They carry something in them that he has never been able to name, and has long since stopped trying to. The steel glows orange under the fire. Then it glows white. Then, slowly, it begins to move. This is what common smiths cannot reach. Without the old words, Valyrian steel will take heat all night and give nothing back. With them, the metal opens, reluctantly, the way everything old and proud opens to a stranger's hands. The first resistance is always the worst. It says no. It holds. Then it considers what is being asked of it, and then, in its own time, it yields. He shapes it toward a bastard sword, hand and a half, balanced toward the blade, the kind of weapon a young man can use with one hand in close quarters or 2 hands when a cut needs the full weight of the body behind it. Ice was a great sword, built for the height and reach of a grown man, for the way Ned Stark moved, for executions on the steps of septs, and the kind of command that announces itself before it strikes. That sword does not fit a boy of 16. What he is making now will. He works through the middle hours with the hammer and the Qohoric words in turns, shaping and correcting, and listening to what the metal tells him about where it needs to go. The steel talks back, if you know how to hear it. Not in words, in the resistance at the edges, in the way certain strikes ring differently from others, in small signs that a trained man reads without thinking about them. He has been reading those signs for 30 years. He reads them now. Then he makes his attempt at color. He speaks the secondary words, the ones that in theory draw the steel toward a chosen shade. He used them on this same metal once before, years ago, with a different commission. He had tried for a color the client wanted, and the steel had taken what it chose instead. He has wondered since then if he had simply made an error in the speaking. He has not made an error. The steel does not want a color. It takes what it chooses, and what it chooses is its own. He watches it decide. The pale silver that ice carried for hundreds of years, that cold moonlit quality it had hanging on the wall at Winterfell, is gone, burned out of it in the heat of the remaking. What replaces it is dark grey, deep and muted, with a ripple of red running through the folded metal in veins that are almost as dark as the grey itself. He brings it to the light of his lantern and tilts the flat of the blade toward him. The red is deep at its centre, the colour of blood that has dried against stone. It runs in long, curling lines from the crossguard to the tip, and when he turns the blade, the grey and the red shift against each other like something alive, like smoke pulled sideways by a wind you cannot feel. He cannot make it do anything else. This is what the steel has decided it is. He works with it, not against it, and moves on. Meanwhile, at the top of the world, Jon Snow is standing on the wall in the dark. He is 16 years old, dark-haired, grey-eyed, lean in the way of a young man who has been training hard for months and eating only what the Night's Watch feeds its crows. The wall is 700 feet of old ice beneath his boots, and it does not care who stands on it or why. On clear nights, he can see the world from up here, the forest stretching north until it becomes a dark line at the horizon, and then nothing. Tonight the sky is low and grey, with a storm coming in off the north, and the wildling fires that showed as orange points in the tree line 2 nights ago have gone dark or moved on. Longclaw is at his hip. The sword is Valyrian steel, old and light and deadly sharp, a bastard sword that runs about a good half-foot longer than a standard longsword. The pommel is a white stone direwolf head, carved for him, not for the men of House Mormont, who carried it before. Jor Mormont gave it to him, after Jon saved the old man's life from a wight that came through the Lord Commander's quarters in the small hours of the night. Jon pulled a burning curtain down on it. He does not remember making the decision to do that. He only remembers the curtain coming down and the thing catching fire, and then the Lord Commander, alive, and the wight burning on the floor. He has carried Longclaw since. He knows its weight without thinking. He hears Sam climbing the steps before he sees him. Samwell Tarly is 16 years old and soft-spoken and afraid of almost everything, and he is Jon's closest friend at Castle Black, which is still a fact that surprises Jon sometimes, in the way that true things sometimes do. Sam arrives breathing hard and stands beside him in the wind and looks north at the dark. "Nothing," Sam says. "Nothing," Jon agrees. They stand there a while without talking. The wind moves between them. Far below, in the barracks at the base of the wall, the watch changes over, one set of tired men replaced by another. Far to the south, in a stone barn lit by 4 corner forges on a hill above the river gate, a craftsman is working the final strokes of a blade that neither of them know exists, shaping dark grey and red-rippled steel toward a purpose that Jon Snow has no name for yet. Sam says he is cold. Jon doesn't argue. They go back down. In King's Landing, Tobho Mott holds the finished blade up in the last of the firelight. The grey and red ripples shift as he turns it. He looks at it for a long moment. It is not Widow's Wail. It is not Oathkeeper. Those blades are names that do not exist in this version of the world, and this blade does not have a name at all yet. He suspects the young man who receives it will give it one eventually, or the blade will go without a name and be known only by what it does. Either way, that is not a craftsman's business. He wraps it in oiled cloth until no part of the steel shows. He sets it in the long, narrow chest with iron fittings and places Ned Stark's sealed letter on top of the wrapped blade before he closes the lid. The letter is addressed in Ned's hand to Jon Snow at Castle Black. Tobho does not open it. He has already been told what matters. The blade is a gift from a dead man to a living one, paid for honestly and promised before either man knew what the world was about to become. That is enough for a craftsman to know. He bars the chest. He carries it through the house to the locked room off the front passage and sets it down. The work is done. The chest arrives at Castle Black on a morning in late winter, carried through the gates by a courier who gives his name to no one and refuses to enter the yard. He is a quiet man, unremarkable in every detail, except for the seriousness with which he delivers a long, narrow chest with iron fittings and a name burned into the lid. He hands it off at the gate, turns his horse around, and rides south along the King's Road before anyone can ask him who sent it or where he came from. The Gate Watch does not know what to make of this. They send for the Lord Commander. Jeor Mormont comes out to the gate yard himself to look at the chest. He is a large man, gone heavy in the chest and white in the beard, carrying the weight of 70 years in the deliberate way of men who have learned not to waste movement. He examines the chest without touching it, the iron fittings, the sealed lock, the name burned into the wood in a careful, steady hand. Jon Snow. Castle Black. He turns the lid to read it again, as if reading it a second time might tell him more than the first. It does not. He looks at the Gate Watch. None of them have anything useful to add. He has the chest brought inside. He sends a man to find Jon Snow. Jon is in the training yard when the summons finds him, working through sword forms in the cold morning air with Longclaw out and the yard mostly empty. He wipes the blade and sheaths it without rushing, and follows the man across the yard and into the keep without asking what it is about. At Castle Black he has learned that questions asked on the way to a thing rarely produce useful answers. The chest sits on the long table in Mormont's quarters. A fire burns in the hearth. Jon looks at the chest. He looks at the name on the lid. He looks at Mormont, who is standing to one side with his arms crossed and his expression careful. "Do you know what it is?" Jon asks. "I know what it says," Mormont says. "Open it." The lock is sealed with plain grey wax. No house, no sigil, no identifying mark at all. Jon breaks the seal and lifts the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of folded cloth, is a long bundle wrapped tight in oiled linen. On top of it lies a folded letter, also sealed in grey wax, also unmarked. But the letter is addressed in a hand that Jon knows as well as he knows his own face in a blade of still water. He has seen that hand his entire life. It signed the letters that came north his first year in the Watch. It wrote his name above his door at Winterfell. He picks up the letter and does not open it yet. He turns it over in his hands. The fire in the hearth pops. Mormont says nothing. Jon breaks the seal. The letter is not long. His father's words are plain and direct, the way they always were. Ned Stark writes that before his arrest, he knew he would not survive what was coming, that he had looked at what surrounded him in King's Landing and understood, clearly, that there was no path out of it that ended with him alive. He writes that he could not allow ice to become a Lannister trophy. He writes that the sword spent 500 years meaning something honest, and that he would not let it be divided and renamed and given to men who would use it to celebrate his death. He writes that he arranged for the reforging before anyone could stop him, and that the blade in the chest is made from Ice's steel, and that it belongs to Jon, not to Robb, who has the Stark name, not to the family, to Jon. He writes that he could not say certain things while he was alive. He writes that he is sorry for that. He writes that he loves Jon. That is the word he uses. Not duty, not responsibility. Love. Stated plainly, without qualification, the way a man states a fact he should have stated a long time ago. Jon folds the letter slowly and holds it against his chest, He stands looking at the far wall for a long moment while the fire moves. Then he sets the letter on the table and reaches into the chest. The bundle is heavier than he expects. Not the full two-handed weight of ice as he remembers it from childhood, but solid, a serious thing. He unwraps it on the table, pulling the oiled cloth back, fold by fold. The steel comes into the firelight, dark grey, with red running through it. He has held Valyrian steel before. Longclaw is pale and silver-cold, brilliant at the edges, the kind of blade that catches light from across a room. This is nothing like that. The grey is deep and almost muted, and the red moves through the folded metal in long curling veins, rippling from the crossguard to the tip in lines that shift when he tilts the blade, that change character entirely depending on the angle of the light. In some positions the grey swallows the red. In others the red comes forward, and the whole surface shifts like deep water moving under a dark sky. It is not a colour any craftsman chose. The steel chose it for itself, and looking at it, Jon understands that the blade has a character that the man who made it didn't impose and couldn't have. He holds it up, balanced for a young man's reach, old and sharp in the way of things made by someone who understood what they were making. Mormont is watching from the other side of the room. He arranged this before he died, Jon says. Yes, Mormont says. He does not seem surprised exactly. He seems as though he is thinking carefully before he speaks. Jon sets the dark blade on the table and draws Longclaw. He holds both swords side by side, the pale one and the dark one, their edges both catching the fire. 2 pieces of Valyrian steel. No man on the wall has one. Jon Snow is standing in the Lord Commander's quarters, holding 2. I cannot carry both, he says. No, Mormont agrees. Longclaw was your house's sword. It should go back to your house one day. Mormont is quiet long enough that Jon looks up from the blades. The old man's eyes are steady in the firelight, the eyes of someone who has decided something and is not going to be talked out of it. I gave Longclaw to you, Mormont says, honestly, in full, because you earned it. No one made me do that, and no one can unmake it. And your father gave you that blade with the last of his planning, honestly, because he wanted you to have something of his that meant something. He looks at the 2 swords. Both of those gifts were given completely. I won't take mine back. What you do with them is your own business now. Jon looks at both blades for a time. Then he sheaths Longclaw. He finds Sam in the hall outside the library and brings him to the quarters and tells him everything. The letter, the chest, what Ned had arranged in secret before his arrest, what ice had been remade into. Sam listens to all of it without interrupting, which is one of the things Jon values most about him. And when Jon finishes, Sam looks at the dark blade on the table for a long moment. Then he says, Your father made you a sword. Yes, Jon says. That is not nothing, Sam says. Jon looks at the blade. The grey and red ripples hold still in the firelight, the same and shifting all at once. No, he says. It is not. The raven arrives before dawn. The message is brief. 3 lines scratched in a tight hand, the kind of brevity that means there is no good way to say it longer. The northern host is destroyed at the Twins. Robb Stark, king in the north, is dead. Lady Catelyn Stark is dead. The Freys and the Boltons have broken their guest right and their oaths in a single night, and the army that marched south under the Stark banner to avenge Ned's death will not be marching back. The Maester of Castle Black reads it aloud twice and then stops speaking. Jon Snow is told at first light. He stands in the passage outside the Maester's door and reads the message himself, holding the scrap of paper in both hands in the torchlight. The ink is still sharp. He reads it a second time, the way a man reads something he understands, but does not yet believe. He says nothing. He thanks the man who delivered it. He walks outside. The wall is a cliff of white ice behind Castle Black, rising into a sky just starting to grey at the horizon. Jon goes to the base of it and stands there in the cold with his back to the castle and his face toward the north. There is no wind. The dark line of the forest begins where the cleared ground ends, and beyond it there is nothing he can see. Just the trees, and behind the trees the rest of the world, all the things that do not care about the name Stark or about what happened at the twins last night. He thinks about Robb. He thinks about Robb, at 10 years old, tall for his age already, with their father's brown hair and the tully blue eyes that Jon didn't inherit. Robb, who was always going to be Lord of Winterfell, always going to carry the name in a way that Jon was not. Robb, who treated Jon like a brother, without ever making him feel the weight of the word bastard, who trained with him and rode with him and argued with him, and was the closest thing to an equal Jon had in the years before the Watch. He thinks about the last time he saw Robb, before everything fell apart, before the war that neither of them could stop. He thinks about what it means that Robb is dead at 18 years old with his army murdered around him at a feast. He thinks about Catelyn. She was never kind to him. He understood why, or thought he did. He was the proof of her husband's failure, the living reminder of a night she could not know the truth about and would not ask. She looked at him with an expression that he spent his childhood trying not to deserve and could not change. He does not mourn her the way he mourns Robb. He mourns her because she was Robb's mother, and because she is dead by treachery, and because nobody who deserved to die at the twins deserved to die the way she died. That is enough. The reforged blade is at his side. He presses one hand against the pommel for a moment, without drawing it. He is the last Stark the world knows. Bran and Rickon are in hiding. Sansa is a Lannister prisoner in King's Landing. Arya is somewhere, gone, vanished, alive or not alive, and he does not know which. The world does not know about any of them. The world knows about Robb, and Robb is dead, and the name now has no army and no king and no castle that the Starks control. What the world knows is that it is over. What the world does not know is that Ned Stark made his bastard a sword. Jon turns away from the north and goes back inside. He finds Sam in the small room off the library where Sam goes to read when he does not want to be found, which is most mornings. Sam looks up from his book and sees Jon's face and puts the book down. Jon draws Longclaw and holds it out. Sam stares at it. "Jon, hold it for me," Jon says. "Not forever. Until I know what to do with it." He sets it on the table in front of Sam, the white stone direwolf looking up at the ceiling. "Mormont gave it to me honestly. It should go back to his family eventually. I am not a Mormont. It was never mine to keep in the same way the other blade is mine." Sam looks at the sword and then looks at Jon. "You're not giving it up," he says. "I'm putting it where it belongs for now," Jon says, "which is not on my hip when I have my father's sword on my back." Sam nods. He does not argue with this. He puts his hand on Longclaw's pommel the way a man accepts a responsibility he did not ask for, and Jon goes back out into the corridor. The Watch has heard about the Red Wedding by mid-morning. The news moves through the castle, the way news always moves in a place where men have little else to talk about, quickly and with embellishment. By midday, it has reached the officers' quarters at the far end of the keep. Jon is in the passage outside the common room when he hears one of the senior men say it. Ned Stark's bastard is of even less consequence now than he was yesterday. No Stark army coming down the King's Road for him. No lord to remind the watch to treat him carefully. The Stark name is worth less this morning than it was worth last night, and it was not worth much last night either. Jon stands in the passage and listens. He keeps his face still and his breathing even, and waits until the voice moves on to something else. Then he goes to the training yard. He shrugs the reforged blade up onto his back in the worn leather harness he had made for it, the dark grey and red steel catching the pale winter light. He picks up a practice sword. He begins to work through the forms, one after another, the same ones he has run every morning for months. He does not think about the twins. He does not think about what the senior men said. He works through the forms until the sweat is in his eyes and his shoulders ache, and then he works through them again. Far to the north, in the dark beneath the trees beyond the wall's edge, Bran Stark sleeps beside a low fire while his small party rests. He is 9 years old and cannot walk, and has not been able to walk since the fall, and the world he lives in now is not the world he was born expecting. He has learned to go somewhere else when he sleeps, somewhere that is not sleeping exactly, and not quite waking, where the trees are older than memory, and something watches from the inside of the wood. He sees a blade. It is brief, a flicker, the way weirwood visions always are when they come before you know how to hold them. A sword with a dark, rippling blade, grey as deep water, with red veins moving through the steel, a young man's hand around the grip, grey eyes. He cannot see the face clearly. He does not know who this is or what it means. The vision fades before he can ask it. He wakes with his hand pressed against the cold ground and the fire burning low, and he says nothing to his companions about what he saw. He does not have the words for it yet. He keeps it with him, a small and wordless thing, and goes back to sleep. Beyond the wall, the world has a different quality at night. Jon has been ranging with the wildling host for weeks now, and he has not stopped noticing it. The silence that is not silence. The way the dark between the trees holds a quality that the dark south of the wall does not. South of the wall, the dark is just the absence of light. North of it, the dark feels like a presence. He has tried to explain this to no one. It is not the kind of thing he could explain to the men at Castle Black. And here among the wildlings, it would mark him as someone who does not understand what cold and dark actually mean to people who have lived in it their whole lives. He keeps his thoughts on the sword. The reforged bastard sword rides across his back in its harness, and the wildlings have been looking at it since the first night he came into their camp. They are not people who miss details about weapons. Among the free folk, a man's blade is his biography, and this one does not look like anything they have seen before. The dark grey rippled steel with its veins of deep red is unusual in a way that takes people a moment to name. They circle it with their eyes the way you circle an unfamiliar animal. They ask questions. A heavy-set man with a red beard sits across the fire from Jon one night, watching the blade where it lies across Jon's knees. "What is that?" the man asks. "Valyrian steel," Jon says. The man looks at him. "Where does a crow get Valyrian steel?" "It belonged to my father," Jon says. He wraps both hands around the grip and looks at the fire. The man nods, satisfied or close enough to it, and does not ask again. A few of the others exchange looks, but nobody presses further. In the wildling camp, a man's father is his own business. The attack comes 3 nights later, in the dark well past midnight, when the camp's fire has burned down to coals and the sentries are tired. Jon wakes to the sound of screaming. Not the quick, surprised scream of a man who has been cut, but the longer, ragged sound that means something worse. He is on his feet with the blade in his hand before he is fully awake, moving toward the sound on instinct, and then he sees them. Wights. They come out of the tree line in a stumbling rush, the ones in front reaching with hands that no longer work the way living hands work. Too rigid fingers, joints that do not bend right, dead faces with eyes that have gone the blue of a winter sky in the coldest part of the year. There are perhaps a dozen of them. The camp's fire is too low to help much, and they are already among the nearest tents before anyone has a weapon ready. John does not think. He moves. The first wight reaches for him, and he cuts through its arm at the elbow, and the arm falls, but the thing keeps coming, and he pivots and cuts across its neck, and the thing drops. The Valyrian steel goes through it, the way it goes through everything, cleanly, without resistance, as though the thing were made of paper, and the sword were made of something that paper doesn't understand. He kills the second one and the third one, while two of the wildlings bring torches and the rest get their own weapons out. The fight is short. It is ugly in the way all fights in the dark are ugly, but it is short. When it is over, 8 wights are down, 4 killed with fire, 4 killed with the blade, and the camp is quiet again, except for the breathing of the survivors and one man's low, persistent moaning from where he took a blow to the ribs before anyone got to him. John stands at the edge of the firelight with the dark blade in his hand and looks at the tree line. His hands are steady. He knows what the blade is capable of now, and it is capable of exactly what it needs to be. He wipes it clean on the frost-stiff grass and sheaths it. The news from Castle Black finds him 8 days after that, brought by a runner who has been moving south along the King's Road at speed, and arrived at the camp looking like a man who had not slept more than an hour at a stretch for 3 days. He carries a message from the watch, brief and formal, the way death notices from institutions always are. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont is dead. He was killed at Cruster's Keep, north of the wall, in a mutiny by his own men. The men of the watch turned on him in the night, the same men he had led through the cold and the dark and the ranging, the same men who had eaten at his fire. He was old and he was tired, and he had given the watch more years than most men live, and his own brothers killed him. John sits with the message for a long time. He thinks about Mormont standing in the Lord Commander's quarters with the sealed chest on the table, telling John that both blades were given honestly and that he would not take his back. He thinks about Mormont's eyes in the firelight. Steady, unsurprised, careful, the eyes of a man who had lived long enough to know what things were worth. He thinks about what it means to live that long and serve that faithfully and die the way Mormont died. He puts the message away. 2 days later, a courier arrives from Castle Black with a package wrapped in cloth. Sam's message is 4 lines long. Mormont is gone. There is no Mormont to return this sword to. Not here, not yet, not in any way John can act on from north of the wall. Longclaw is John's until the world settles enough to know what to do with it. Sam has enclosed the sword. He does not say keep it forever. He says keep it for now. John unwraps it in the firelight, the white stone direwolf looking up at him from the pommel. He is carrying 2 Valyrian blades again, the dark grey and red blade from his father, across his back, the pale silver blade from his Lord Commander at his hip. He does not have a name for either of them. He does not need one yet. He has a use for both of them, and uses for now are enough. Tywin Lannister does not shout. This is something everyone in his service understands. The absence of shouting is not a sign that he is calm. It is a sign that he is measuring something, that the cold behind his eyes is doing the work that other men do with raised voices. He sits at the long table in the Tower of the Hand and looks at Tobho Mott with an expression that has no name in any language, but that all the men standing in the room recognize immediately as the face of a man deciding whether what he is hearing requires consequences. Tobho Mott stands in front of that table and does not fidget. "Tell me again," Tywin says. Tobho tells him again. There was a prior commission. Ned Stark came to his shop before his arrest. A night visit, early hours, a sealed letter, and a purse that covered the work. The instructions were clear. 1 blade, delivered north. When Ice arrived at the shop after the execution, Tobho had already been paid, and the commission was already in place. He honored the prior claim. Tywin is quiet for a long moment. "The letter," he says. "I do not have it," Tobho says. "It was sealed in the chest with the blade. It went north with the sword." "And the purse?" "Paid. Work done. That is how commissions work, my lord." Tywin looks at him. His eyes are the color of old gold, and they do not blink at the rate that most eyes blink. He is 59 years old, and has been the most powerful man in Westeros for longer than Tobho has had his shop on the Street of Steel, and he is the kind of man who can make a craftsman feel the weight of that, simply by looking at him across a table. Tobho looks back. He is a Qohorik. He has worked for lords whose names are older than the 7 kingdoms. He knows what he did, and he knows why he did it, and he is not going to unsay it. "You are telling me," Tywin says, "that there are no 2 swords." "There is 1 sword," Tobho says, "at Castle Black." Tywin is still for a moment. Then he says, "You may go." After Tobho leaves, Tywin sits at the table alone and thinks. He has thought through a great many problems in this room. He thinks through this one the same way he thinks through all the others, methodically, without feeling, removing each piece of the situation from the board and examining what remains. The sword is gone. It is north. There is no retrieving it without demanding that the Night's Watch surrender a man's personal inheritance, which is the kind of demand that makes a lord look petty and draws attention to things Tywin would prefer to keep quiet. The watch is independent of the crown by ancient right. Making a public issue of this means explaining why a Valyrian blade matters to him, which means explaining what the blade was supposed to become, which means acknowledging that the plan failed. He will not do that. The direct path is closed. But there are other paths. Jon Snow is a bastard at the Wall. He has no title, no army, no family left that the world recognizes. The Stark host is broken. Winterfell is not in Stark hands. The boy is a crow with a sword he cannot be compelled to surrender, and he will remain a crow as long as his standing in the Watch can be managed. The Watch has officers. Officers can be influenced. Appointments can be arranged. A Lord Commander favorable to the Crown's interests can find reasons to send certain rangers on certain ranging missions from which they do not return. This is not a new method. This is the method Tywin used in the Riverlands. It is the method he used at the Twins. He does not need to take the sword. He needs to take the man. He is still working through the details of this when the door opens and Joffrey comes in. Joffrey at 13 is already the most exhausting person in any room he enters. He is tall for his age, with the golden hair and green eyes that Tywin recognizes from his own children, and he has inherited absolutely none of the qualities that made those children worth having. He has heard servants talk, and Joffrey has always gotten everything he heard from servants, about the Valyrian sword. He wants to know where his sword is. He was supposed to receive a Valyrian blade made from the Stark sword. Every king should have a Valyrian sword. He has been told there is a bastard at the Wall who has it. "I want it," Joffrey says. "Send for it." Tywin looks at his grandson. "The Night's Watch will not surrender a man's personal sword at a king's demand," he says. "To ask them to try is to appear weak." "I'm not weak." "The appearance of weakness," Tywin says, "and the fact of weakness have the same consequences. You will receive a blade worthy of a king. This matter is being addressed." He lets a pause settle over the room. "You will not speak of this again." Joffrey is not used to being stopped. He opens his mouth. He looks at his grandfather's face. He closes his mouth. He leaves the room the way a boy leaves a room when he is angry and has been told he may not show it. Quickly, with his chin up, his footsteps loud on the stone. The door swings shut behind him. In the corner of the room, where she has been sitting in silence since before Tobho arrived, Cersei Lannister sets down the cup she is holding. She is 33 years old and beautiful, and has spent every year of her adult life inside her father's calculations, watching him manage the world as though it were a counting house that had gotten slightly out of order. She watches the door that Joffrey left through. She watches Tywin pick up the documents on the table and begin to read. She watches him file away whatever he has decided about Jon Snow, the way he files away everything, cleanly, without visible effort, in the place where he keeps things that are not finished yet. She notes all of this. She keeps it. She does not know, sitting in that corner, that she will need to hold it herself before the season is out. She does not know about the crossbow, or the night, or the way her father's last moments play out in a room she is not in. She knows only that there is a bastard at the wall with a sword her son was supposed to have, and that her father has a plan for it, and that the plan is in his head and not yet written anywhere she can read it. When Tywin is dead, and he dies the way powerful men sometimes die, suddenly and in humiliation, killed by the son he underestimated in a place where he thought he was untouchable, the plan dies with him. What does not die is the anger. Cersei carries it out of the Tower of the Hand and into everything that comes after. She does not have her father's patience for indirect action. She does not have his understanding of institutions, his careful way of placing people where they will be useful years from now. What she has is the memory of a sword her son should have received, and the name of the bastard who has it, and a crown that is about to sit very uneasily on her head. She will find a use for both. Jon Snow is 20 years old when he becomes the most hated man at Castle Black. He does not become it all at once. It accumulates across the months of his command. A decision here, arranging there, each one necessary by his reckoning, each one adding weight to the silence that grows in certain quarters of the castle when he walks through. He is Lord Commander now. He was elected legitimately by the votes of his brothers, and the authority is real. What is also real is that not every man who voted for him understood what they were voting for, and not every man who voted against him has made his peace with the result. The decision that tips the balance is the one he knew would tip it. He opens the gates, not to the dead, to the living. The free folk, the wildlings, the people who have been living north of the wall since before anyone on the south side thought to call them enemies. Jon brings them through. He has stood where they stand. He has lived in their camps and eaten their food and understood, with the clarity of someone who has been on both sides of the argument, that what is coming from the north is not a war between the Watch and the wildlings, but something so much larger that the Watch and the wildlings together may not be enough to stop it. He brings them south because they are the only reinforcement he has, and if his brothers cannot understand that, then he needs to make the decision anyway and let his brothers be wrong. Some of his brothers are more than wrong. Some of them call what he has done a betrayal. He hears it in the corridors. He reads it in the faces of the senior men who attend his briefings and say nothing, and look at him with an expression that is not anger, exactly. Anger he could work with, but something harder and colder and more settled than anger. He carries both swords through the castle each day, the pale one at his hip and the dark one across his back, and the men who pass him in the passages look at the blades and look away, and he does not stop walking. He does not know how many of them have made an agreement. The night is clear and cold and very still. A man comes to his quarters, one of his own, a young face, one that he has seen at his table, one he has no reason to distrust, and says there is something in the yard that requires his attention. A ranging party returned, news he should hear directly. John puts on his cloak, leaves his quarters, and follows the young man down through the passages and out into the yard. He is not wearing the dark blade on his back. He set it down when he sat down to eat. He is wearing long claw at his hip, the dire wolf pommel riding just below his hand, and that is the blade he reaches for when he sees the men waiting in the yard. He does not reach it in time. The first blade takes him in the shoulder from behind, and the shock of it is different from what he expected. Not pain exactly, not at first, but an impact like a hammer strike, a sudden wrongness. He turns. He sees faces. Men he knows. Men he voted for in elections. Men who ate at his fire beyond the wall when there was no other fire. For the watch, one of them says. The second blade takes him in the chest. He gets his hand on Longclaw's grip, and then the third one comes, and then there is nothing in his hand anymore, and nothing beneath his feet. He goes down into the snow. He can feel the cold of it against his face. He can see the torchlight, the long shadows of the men standing over him. One of them says it again, the same 3 words, as if saying it again will make it mean what they need it to mean. He does not have the breath to answer. When he falls, the reforged blade is inside. It is in the Lord Commander's quarters, on the table beside the remains of dinner, wrapped in the harness he takes off when he sits down to eat. It stays there while John is dying in the yard. Dark grey and red rippled steel, the blade Tobho Mott made from Ice's steel in a stone barn in King's Landing, the blade that Ned Stark paid for with the last gold he had and the last commission of his life. It does not know what is happening. Steel does not know things. It lies on the table, and the torchlight moves across its surface, the way the light always moves, the grey deepening and the red shifting, the same as it has always been. Ghost is inside the castle. John was called out alone. By design, the same design that has been used to separate men from their protections since the beginning of time. A message, a trusted face, a direction that leads away from everything that might save them. Ghost is somewhere in the keep, behind the walls, unable to hear the yard or get to it in time. He is there, and John is not, and the distance between them is the length of a plan that John never saw coming. Sam left for the citadel 2 months ago. John walked him to the gate himself and told him to come back with knowledge and not to get killed on the road. Sam wept, the way Sam weeps, which is without apology, and John told him to stop because it was unseemly for a brother of the watch, and they both knew that was not true, but it made Sam laugh, which was the point. Sam is not here. John's vision narrows at the edges. The cold and the dark come in together from the sides, the way the dark always comes in from beyond the wall, like a presence, like something that was waiting. He can feel the snow. He can see the torch guttering in the still air. He can see, very faintly, through the open door to his quarters, the edge of the table where the sword is lying. Dark grey. Red. The ripples barely visible from this distance and this angle. Then he cannot see anything. They lay him on the table in the Lord Commander's quarters, on the same table where the chest arrived, and where he read Ned's letter by firelight, and where Sam sat and told him that a father making a son a sword was not nothing. Davos Seaworth is the one who carries Jon's body inside, with the help of 2 of the free folk who understand, who have always understood, better than any crow alive, what is coming from the north and what it means to lose the man who was willing to act on that understanding. Davos is 43 years old and has spent his life in service to hard men in hard causes, and he knows how to read a room and a situation and a body for what they actually are, rather than what he is being told they are. What he is being told, by the men of the watch who did this, is that the Lord Commander was a traitor who got what traitors get. What he reads, looking at Jon Snow laid out on the table with the wounds still fresh in the torchlight, is a young man of 20 who made decisions that took more courage than anyone in that yard has ever been asked for, and who was repaid for it in the oldest, smallest way that frightened men pay for things. He sends the watch's men out of the room. He will not let them burn the body. He goes to find the priestess. She is a woman in red who has been at Castle Black since Stannis brought his forces to the wall, and Davos has never trusted her, and doesn't trust her now, and he goes to find her anyway, because trust is not the question. The question is whether she can do what he has heard she can do. He has heard stories. He puts aside what he thinks of the stories, and he knocks on her door, and when she answers, he tells her what he needs. She says nothing for a long moment. Then she says she will try. In the Lord Commander's quarters, Davos has placed the reforged blade on the table beside the body. He does not know why he does this. It seems right in the way that some things seem right before you have the words for it. The sword was his. It should be near him. Wherever he is now, it should be within reach. The dark grey and red steel catches the light from the hearth. The fire has been kept burning. The room is quiet. The priestess speaks her words over Jon's body, and Davos stands back and watches. He does not understand the words. He does not need to. He watches Jon's face. Nothing happens. Then Jon gasps. It is not a dramatic sound. It is not the sound from songs about the returning dead. It is a short, rough, desperate pull of air, the sound of a body remembering that it needs to breathe and doing it badly at first, and then better. And then Jon's eyes are open, and he is staring at the ceiling with an expression that has no name, because nobody who has made it has ever had to find the right word for it before. Davos crosses the room in 4 steps. Jon turns his head. He looks at Davos. His eyes are the same grey they have always been, dark grey, the colour of the winter sky just before snow, and they are wide and very still, and Davos looks into them and sees that whoever died in that yard is still dead. Something is present in this room that was not present before, something that came back, but it did not come back unchanged. The part of Jon Snow that knelt in the snow under those blades and understood what his brothers were doing to him. That part is not here anymore. What remains is something quieter and harder and less surprised by the world. Jon sits up slowly. He looks at the table beside him. He reaches out and picks up the reforged blade. He sits on the edge of the table with it across his knees for a long moment, both hands around the grip. looking at the dark grey and red ripples in the steel. The fire in the hearth moves. Davos does not speak. The priestess has withdrawn to the far corner of the room, and she does not speak either. There is nothing to say that would improve on the silence. Jon breathes. He holds the blade his father made for him. He breathes again. He stands. He is steadier on his feet than Davos expected. He crosses the room to where his Night's Watch cloak hangs on an iron hook beside the door, and he lifts it down, and he holds it for a moment. The black wool, the familiar weight of it, 4 years of his life folded into a garment. He looks at it the way a man looks at something he is about to set down for the last time. He puts it on the hook. He turns to Davos. "My watch has ended," Jon says. His voice is the same voice. Quiet, direct, no excess in it. Davos has heard men say larger things in louder ways and mean less by them. "The oath says until my death," Jon says. "I died. I kept my oath. Whatever I do next, I do as a free man." Davos looks at him. He looks at the cloak on the hook. He looks at the blade in Jon's hand, the grey and red ripples holding still in the firelight, the same as they have always been, unchanged by what just happened, unchanged by anything, a piece of old steel that does not know it has been waiting. "What will you do next?" Davos asks. Jon looks at the blade for a moment. He looks at the door. "The north," he says. He pulls the door open and walks through it, the dark blade at his side, Ghost falling in beside him from somewhere in the passage. The direwolf's white coat bright in the torchlight, his red eyes level, his pace matching Jon's without being called. They walk together down the passage toward the cold, and whatever comes with it. Davos watches them go. Then he takes Jon's cloak down from the hook and folds it carefully and sets it on the table beside the wounds that are already closing. He follows them out. Sansa Stark rides through the gates of Castle Black on a grey morning, and Jon Snow sees her before she sees him. He is standing on the steps when the horses come through, and he watches her dismount, taller than he remembers, older by 4 years of things he was not there for, her auburn hair dark with travel, and her face carrying something that was not there the last time he saw it. She was 13 when they parted. She was a girl practicing to be whatever the world was asking of her. She is 17 now, and she has survived King's Landing and everything it did to her. And the way she carries herself across the yard toward him is not the way a girl moves. It is the way someone moves who has decided, at considerable cost, not to be afraid. She sees him. She stops walking for just a moment. Not long. Just the pause of someone absorbing more than they expected. And then she crosses the remaining distance quickly, and Jon meets her halfway, and they hold each other in the grey morning light without speaking. He cannot remember the last time he did this with anyone. He cannot remember if he ever did this with her specifically. They were never close the way he was close with Arya, or the way she was close with Robb. But they are the only Starks in this yard, and that covers a great deal of ground. When she steps back, she looks at the sword. The dark grey and red blade is at his hip today, the reforged bastard sword that Tobho Mott made from Ice's steel in a stone barn 3 years ago, and 1,000 miles south of here. Sansa looks at it the way someone looks at something they are trying to place. Not unfamiliar, not quite recognized. Somewhere in between. "I heard about it," she says slowly. "In King's Landing. The servants were saying the Stark sword had gone to an armourer on the Street of Steel. I didn't know what they were going to do with it." She looks up at Jon. "I thought the Lannisters had it remade into something of theirs." "They were going to," Jon says. He takes her inside and gives her the letter. She reads it standing at the table in his quarters. and he watches her face while she reads. She takes longer than he did. She goes back and reads certain lines again. When she sets it down, she does not cry, but she holds the edge of the table with both hands for a moment and breathes slowly, the way a person breathes when they are deciding not to cry. He knew what he was doing, she says. That is what I believe, John says. She looks at him. Do you doubt it? He thinks about the question honestly. Sometimes, he says. I hope he knew, but he is not here to ask. She nods. She looks at the letter one more time and then folds it carefully along the original creases and holds it out to him. He takes it and puts it away where he keeps it. That evening, Stannis Baratheon comes to find him. He is 39 years old and has the look of a man who was always harder than comfortable and has since become harder than that. Close-cropped grey beard, jaw like a fortress wall, eyes that weigh everything they look at for strategic value. He has been at the wall since the wildlings came south, and he has an army, what remains of it. And he has made clear since Jon's resurrection that he considers Jon's survival a resource, and Jon's resurrection a debt. You have a name, Stannis says, which is his way of opening conversations he considers to be negotiations. The Stark name, or close enough that the lords of the North will treat it as the same thing. I have an army. The North cannot be retaken with a name alone, and an army cannot hold the North without a name behind it. I am aware of this, Jon says. Then we are agreed. We are not agreed yet, Jon says. We are close. Davos finds him later, in the quiet hour before the Northern Lords gather. He's right about the numbers, Davos says. He says this in the tone of a man who would prefer not to be delivering news that makes things complicated. If you go to reclaim Winterfell and the North with what you have, the Free Folk, the Watch's remnant, the Bolton forces will hold. Stannis's men are the difference. Jon listens. He already knows this. He has been adding it up since Sansa arrived, with the knowledge that Winterfell is under Bolton control and that his youngest brother is somewhere in it as a hostage. He knows what the numbers say. I know, he says. So, Davos says. So, Jon says. We use what we have. The Lords of the North fill the Great Hall at Castle Black 2 days later. Men who have ridden hard through cold weather to be in a room together, old houses and small houses, lords with armies, and lords with 30 men, all of them with the same look on their faces that northern lords always have when they are deciding something they know they cannot undecide. Jon stands before them without a throne and without a crown, and with Sansa at his side. He does not speak about bloodlines. He reaches back and draws the reforged blade from its harness and holds it up in the torchlight of the great hall. The grey and red ripples move across the steel, the same dark water shift that the blade has always had, the same that it showed in Tobho Mott's barn and in the Lord Commander's quarters and in the firelight beyond the wall. This is ice, Jon says, the ancestral sword of House Stark. Eddard Stark arranged for it to be reforged the week before his death, one blade sent north for me. He paid for it himself. He kept it secret. He died before he could tell anyone. He lowers the blade slowly. He left a letter. I have it. He said the sword belongs with someone who will use it honestly. He said the Lannisters wouldn't have it. He looks out at the lords. This is the last Stark sword in the world. It did not come to me by law. It came to me because my father wanted me to have it. I am asking you to decide whether that means something. The hall is quiet. Then a girl stands up. She is 11 years old. She is small and composed, and she looks at the assembled lords of the North as though she has been practicing this her whole short life, which, In certain senses, she has. Lyanna Mormont is Lady of Bear Island, and she has been Lady of Bear Island since she was old enough to sign her own letters with an authority that makes grown men read them twice. Her house words are, "Here we stand." She looks at Jon Snow and at the sword, and at the assembled men of the north. "Bear Island knows no king," she says, "but the king in the north, whose name is Stark." She says it the way someone states a fact that was true before the room filled up and will be true after it empties. She says it without raising her voice, which makes it louder than any shout. A beat of silence. Then the lord to her left stands. Then another. Then the hall is standing, and the sound is a single long word repeated over and over, building on itself, the name that the North has been waiting to give to someone since the twins. King in the North. King in the North. King in the North. Jon does not look like a king standing there. He looks like a young man of 20, with dark hair and grey eyes, and a sword in his hand that his father made for him, which is exactly what he is, and which is enough. In the back of the hall, near the door, Brienne of Tarth watches. She is 23 years old, tall as most men and broader in the shoulder, with a plain face that people tend to underestimate, and a record in combat that corrects that error efficiently. She watches Jon hold up the blade, and she watches the Lord stand, and she does something that she does not often do in public, which is think about what is not there. In another version of this world, there would have been a sword made from that same steel, and it would have been called Oathkeeper, and it would have come to her eventually, through Jaime Lannister, with an oath attached to it. Find the Stark daughters, keep them safe, make the word Lannister mean something just for once. She carries common steel now. She does not know about the other world. She only knows about the gap where something should be, a feeling she cannot name because she does not have the information to name it. She looks at Sansa Stark standing beside her brother. She crosses the hall and takes a knee. "Lady Sansa," she says, "I swore an oath to your mother. I have not yet fulfilled it. I am asking you to let me try." Sansa looks at her for a moment, the steady, measuring look of someone who has learned that trust is a thing you build carefully and at some cost. And then she says yes. Brienne stands. The great hall is still ringing with the name. Rickon Stark runs across the field like a boy who has not yet learned that running in a straight line is how people die on open ground. He is 9 years old, and he has been a hostage for months. And now the Lord who holds Winterfell has put him on the field as a message, as bait, as the kind of cruelty that announces itself as power. He runs. Jon watches from the other side of the field, 200 yards away, too far to reach him in time, knowing it and riding anyway. The reforged blade is in his hand, dark grey and red, Ice's steel, his father's gift, and he is riding straight at what is coming, because Rickon is running, and that is what Jon does, and has always done. He rides toward the Stark who needs him, even when it is too late. He sees Rickon fall. Jon hits the Bolton line alone, before his own forces have fully committed, which is exactly what the Lord who holds Winterfell wanted. The line closes around him. The reforged blade moves in close quarters, short strokes, the kind of fighting that is not elegant and is not supposed to be. It is survival arithmetic, clearing the space around you one body at a time, staying on your feet, staying on your horse until the horse goes down, and then staying on your feet without it. Jon fights with the dark blade and thinks of nothing except the next man and the next. The line tightens. He loses his footing once and goes down under the weight of bodies. and for a moment it is very much like the yard at Castle Black. The press of things on top of him, the narrowing of light, the cold. He drives upward and finds air. Then the sound changes. He hears it before he sees it. The horn calls from the south, the thunder of unblooded horses, the Vale knights coming in on the flank with their lances down and their line intact, fresh and unbroken by the long, miserable grind of the afternoon. The Bolton line does not hold against that. Lines do not hold against a fresh reserve, hitting them from the side when they are already spent. This is not strategy. It is the math of bodies in motion, and the math resolves quickly. The Bolton forces break. The battle turns. John is still on his feet when it ends. He stands in the middle of what was a field and is now a counting of the dead, and he holds the reforged blade down at his side, and the grey and red ripples are dark with the work of the afternoon. He breathes. Winterfell's towers are visible in the distance, dark against the sky. He walks toward them. Then winter comes for real. The news from the wall arrives by raven in the weeks after Winterfell falls. Not a message, but a series of them, each one worse than the last, each one describing what a dragon's blue fire does to 700 feet of ice and ancient magic when the dragon has been dead and reborn and is no longer the dragon it was. Eastwatch by the sea is gone. The wall is breached at its eastern end, torn open by the same flame that no living man has ever seen before. Cold flame, blue-white, burning what should not burn. The dead march south through the gap. Everything John has done since the chest arrived at Castle Black. The sword, the ranging, the wildlings brought through the gates, the crown, the alliance he spent 2 years building from nothing, was not preparation for the Battle of the Bastards. It was preparation for this. He knew it when Mormont was still alive. He knew it beyond the wall in the wildling camps, watching the tree line. He knew it and made every decision with it in mind, and now it is here, and the North has about as much time to ready itself as it takes an army of the dead to walk from Eastwatch to Winterfell. It is not enough time. It is what they have. The battle for Winterfell is fought in the dark, because the Night King does not come in daylight, and has not come in daylight since before anyone alive was born. John is in the Godswood when the dead reach the walls. The ancient Godswood at the centre of Winterfell's keeps, with the great weirwood heart tree at its centre, the pale bark and carved face and blood-red leaves that have stood here since the first men. He chose this ground deliberately. If the Night King comes for the heart tree, it is because the tree means something to him, and things that mean something tend to move toward the thing they mean. He waits. He draws both blades, the reforged bastard sword from ice in his right hand, the dark grey and red ripples familiar as breathing, Longclaw in his left, the pale Valyrian steel of House Mormont, the dire-wolf pommel, old and light and deadly sharp, the blade Jeor Mormont gave him, and that Sam carried for 2 months, and that has been at his hip ever since. 2 blades, 2 dead men's gifts, both of them older than anything he understands, and sharper than anything he deserves. White walkers come into the Godswood. They move the way they have always moved, deliberate, cold, unhurried, because nothing that is coming for you through the dark needs to hurry. John moves to meet them. The Valyrian steel of House Stark shatters the first one in the same instant that the Valyrian steel of House Mormont takes the second. The metal does not distinguish between them. It does not know that one blade came from an ancestral sword, and one came from a gift, and one was made from grief, and one was made from loyalty. It only knows how to cut. The White Walkers are things of cold magic and old ice, and the blades that were made for exactly this work cut through them the way they cut through everything, cleanly, completely, without hesitation or remorse. Jon moves through the godswood with both swords, the dark blade and the pale blade, the Stark steel and the Mormont steel, and the walkers fall. But there are too many. There are always too many. He hears Ghost before he sees him. The dire wolf moving in the dark between the trees, white coat catching the pale light of the weirwood, fighting the whites the way the wolf has always fought, which is with complete commitment to the task and no concern at all for what it costs. Jon fights toward the heart tree, where the Night King stands. He doesn't reach it. He is 20 feet away when Arya Stark comes out of the dark. She is 15 years old, small and quick and completely silent on her feet, with dark hair and grey eyes, and a face that has changed so much since Jon last saw her as a 10-year-old on the streets of King's Landing that he barely recognizes her until he sees her move. She moves the way she has always moved since she started training, like someone who decided very early on exactly where she wanted to end up in a fight, and is only interested in the most direct line to get there. She has the Valyrian steel dagger in her hand, the catspaw, the narrow blade with the dragonbone hilt that has travelled a long road to reach this godswood at this moment. The Night King doesn't see her until she is already there. She drives the dagger into him, and the world ends in the way that this world needed to end. Not with a speech, not with a prophecy fulfilled on a schedule anyone predicted, but with a girl in the dark who had one job and did it. The Night King shatters, and where one walker shatters, all of them shatter, and where the walkers fall, the whites fall with them. Every dead thing animated by the same cold source, going still at the same instant. The army of 100,000 dead, collapsing simultaneously on every wall and every road and every field, between here and the wall. The sound of it is the sound of an army stopping. Jon stands in the godswood in the sudden silence, both blades in his hands, the grey and red steel and the pale silver, and he breathes. The weirwood heart tree stands behind him, still and white, the carved face impassive as it has always been. The blood-red leaves do not move. There is no wind. Arya looks at him across the godswood. He looks at her. She is alive. He is alive. The long night is over. He does not say anything for a moment. Then he lowers the reforged blade, and he walks to her, and she lets him hold her in the godswood in the dark, and neither of them speaks, because everything that needs to be said has been said in the shape of what just happened, and anything added to it now would make it smaller. Howland Reed arrives at Winterfell 3 days after the long night ends. He is small for a man who has carried something this large for this long, quiet-faced, weathered, with the look of someone who has spent most of his adult life in the marshes of the Neck and has made his peace with both the solitude and the weight. He is 40 years old, and he has been waiting for the right moment since the night Ned Stark rode south from the Tower of Joy with a baby and a secret, and the knowledge that some promises cost more than others. He asks to speak to Jon Snow alone. Jon takes him to the godswood. The weirwood heart tree stands at the centre of it, pale and ancient, the carved face worn smooth by centuries of weather, the blood-red leaves perfectly still in the cold morning air. Jon has been to this tree many times in his life, and has never been sure what he was asking it, or whether anything was listening. He goes there now because it is the only private place left in a castle full of people who survived something, and because, whatever Howland Reed has come to say, seems like the kind of thing that should be said before witnesses who cannot repeat it. Howland tells him. He begins with Lyanna Stark, born in Winterfell, Ned's younger sister, the girl who was supposed to marry Robert Baratheon, and did not, who rode from the Harrenhal tourney with a prince and started a war. Or so the story always went. He tells Jon that the story that always went that way was not the whole story. He tells him about the Tower of Joy in Dawn, where Ned and 6 companions rode to find her after the war was over, and what they found when they arrived, Lyanna dying in a room that smelled of blood and roses, with a child in her arms, and barely enough breath left to make the last request she was ever going to make. He tells Jon what she asked. "Promise me, Ned," she said. Those were the words. She made Ned promise to keep the boy safe, to call him his own bastard, to never tell Robert whose blood the child carried. Rhaegar Targaryen's blood. Rhaegar, who had annulled his first marriage and wed Lyanna in secret before a heart tree, with Howland Reed as witness. The marriage was real. The child was legitimate. Ned knew this and carried it in silence for 16 years and put it on the grave with him rather than let it reach the wrong ears. Jon stands in front of the heart tree and listens to all of it. He does not speak for a long time after Howland finishes. He reaches down and draws the reforged blade and holds it across both palms in the cold morning light. Dark grey and red ripples in the steel, the same it has always been, unchanged by the battle and the long night and the years of ranging and fighting and dying and coming back. He looks at it differently now. Ice was a Stark blade. It was Eddard Stark's sword, and before that, his father's, and his father's father's. And somewhere back at the beginning of that line, it belonged to Lyanna Stark's blood as much as anyone else's. Ned had it reforged and sent it north for Jon. He did it because Jon was the bastard he loved, because a dying man's last act of love was a sword that would mean something when everything else was gone. That part Jon knew. He has carried that understanding for 5 years. What he did not know was that the steel in his hands is also his mother's. Lyanna's family's blade, given to her family's son, through the hands of the man who loved them both and kept the secret for both of them, and went to the grave having done everything he could with the time and the silence he had. It is the same sword. It is a different sword. Sansa finds him there an hour later. She stands at the edge of the godswood without coming in immediately, the way Sansa always approaches things she is not sure of, reading the room before she enters it, deciding what her presence will mean. Then she crosses the grass to the heart tree and stands beside him and looks at the blade. He knew the whole time, Jon says. He always knew, she says, about all of it. He never told me. Sansa is quiet for a moment. He couldn't, she says. You know that? I know. He looks at the carved face of the weirwood. He knew more than he ever said. She looks at him with the steady directness she has had since the world taught her to have it. That was always Ned Stark, she says. Jon nods. He holds the blade for another moment. Then he makes his decision. He does not want the Iron Throne. He has known this for longer than he has had a claim to it, and the claim does not change the knowing. He does not want the argument about bloodlines and legitimacy, and what name to call himself, and whether a bastard legitimized by a secret marriage is more or less than a bastard born in honorable silence. He does not want any of that. He will leave it for people who are better at it. And he looks at Sansa when he thinks this, and she looks back at him with the expression of someone who has been preparing for exactly this responsibility for a long time, and is ready for it. He turns to the heart tree. He holds the blade up in front of the weirwood's carved face, in front of the pale bark and the eye sockets that have watched this godswood since before the Starks built their first walls around it, and he speaks the name he has chosen for it. "Promise," he says. One word. The first thing Lyanna said to Ned, and the last thing Ned said to him, in the letter, in the sealed chest, in the commission that cost the last of his gold and the last of his planning. The sword that came from it carries both those promises now, the one that created Jon and the one that armed him. And the name is true in a way that the name Widow's Wail would never have been true, or Oathkeeper, or any name chosen by men who saw the steel as property rather than as a debt. The weirwood says nothing. Weirwoods never do. But the blood-red leaves hold still in the cold air, and Jon holds the blade up for a moment longer before he lowers it. He leaves the next morning. He goes north with Ghost at his side, the dire wolf's white coat bright against the grey winter sky, the red eyes level, the great body moving without sound through the snow, and the dark blade is across his back where it has been for years. The grey and red ripples the same they have always been. The world behind him has a name for him now that it did not have a year ago, and the world ahead of him has the same thing it has always had, cold and dark, and the long silence of the lands beyond the wall. He goes into them. Whatever the realm decides to do with his name and his blood, the sword is already what it always was, a promise kept, made of his mother's steel and his father's love, carried by the boy who grew into the man who came back from the dead to earn it. That part is finished. The promise was made in a tower in Dorne 22 years ago, in a room full of roses and blood, and it was kept across a war and a reforging, and a death and a resurrection, and a battle against the dead. And it is kept now, carried north by a man on a horse with a dire wolf beside him, and a sword on his back that no one can take back. That is our theory. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and this is only one of the paths it might have taken if a dying lord had time to visit a smith on a hill above a river gate, and if the smith had the integrity